So, oh yeah, that's a great point. Alrighty. So, my undergrad experience, I went to UCLA from 2019 to 2023, and I got my bachelor's of science in psychobiology. A couple of stats that I included on my application was that I graduated magna cum laude, and then I was on the dean's honor list for all 4 years. If you are pre-PA, these are just some qualities that you can include on your application. Um, just kind of making you stand out a little bit from other applicants. So here are some common prerequisite courses that I took at UCLA specifically that satisfied a lot of general prerequisites for PA programs. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just what was available and convenient for me to take at UCLA. And a lot of these kind of aligned with my major as well. So I didn't really have to go outside of my major too much to take these classes. Biology, general, and OChem were part of my major, as well as statistics. Genetics satisfied an upper division requirement for me, and general psychology was a part of my like the lower divs for my major. Sociology was something that satisfied a GE. So if you guys are a little bit on the earlier side of your undergraduate education and you're looking for things to satisfy GEs, try to like double dip requirements, prerequisites with your college's requirements. That kind of saves you time in the end in terms of taking prerequisites. So there were definitely some prerequisites that I had to take at community college, which was totally fine by me because this was cheaper and a lot more accessible for me for sure. I took a couple of these during I took a couple of these during my time at UCLA, so just kind of during the summers. There is a little typo here. I did not take biochemistry. This is just something that is a little bit more common for PA programs nowadays to have in their requirements. But that is a little bit of a typo. I'm sorry about that. But I did take anatomy, physiology, microbiology, and medical terminology at a community college. These are your like basic prereqs for PA school. So these are super critical for you to take. And it really does not matter where you take them, just as long as you do take them that is enough to satisfy the requirements for PA school. More and more PA schools are starting to require biochemistry, um, whether that's something that is music to your ears or something that you don't want to hear. That is something that I'm seeing, especially when I was applying. Programs were starting to require that as well. So just a little bit of background in terms of my extracurriculars and volunteering in undergrad. This is what I included on my application. I was in the pre-PA club at UCLA for 3 years. I started as a general member, and then I moved up to an outreach committee member, and then I was co-president for a year in my senior year. We had an internal volunteer program called Match, where we mentored underserved high school students, and I was a part of this program for 2 years. I was a part of founding it as a project director, and then I moved up to co-director in my senior year as well. My volunteering, like I had said, I was a mentor through this match program for 2 years. And then as a part of the pre-PA club, I mentored some other pre-PA students for 2 years as well. In my last year, I spent about 6 months volunteering as a patient transporter at the Ronald Reagan Medical Center at UCLA. Basically, the main responsibility was transporting patients via wheelchair, either between departments or to discharge. I would say it was a really good experience in terms of getting familiar with what the hospital layout is. This was kind of my first exposure to like working in a hospital setting and at like the lowest capacity possible. But it was still kind of exposure to what the environment looks like. And then there was definitely a lot of communication with discharging nurses and other hospital like healthcare professionals and providers, staff, just to make sure that patients were ready to discharge and I was authorized to transport them to their next destination. And then you definitely get a sense of like how to communicate with patients in this role as well. There's definitely a lot of preliminary training that they have you go through to make sure that you're not, compromising any kind of HIPAA privacy and that you're not overstepping your role as a patient transporter so patients feel comfortable with you. So this was a really good kind of jumping off point for me as like kind of entrance into what the hospital setting looks like. So I did take a gap year, and this is like a very contentious topic for some reason in any like med school, like pharmacy school, PA school, any kind of like healthcare journey. I think a lot of people think, gap years are a waste of time, or it's just kind of like it's kind of like an obstacle to what you are eventually needing to do. That's kind of what I thought at first, honestly. And then COVID hit, and I was kind of forced to take a gap year in order to kind of satisfy all of my other requirements. And this gap year was one of the most enjoyable times, honestly, of my life. Um, it really allowed me kind of to step away from school and enter this, new experience of just like workforce full time and also have fun, Like I didn't just take classes and work. I definitely had fun, spent time with family, traveled. This evidenced by this little collage on the side. You can still have fun during your gap year. Like that's the big take home I want to say. This is not just like a year for you to kind of waste or a year for you to kind of like, oh, just work until you can't anymore. This is definitely a time to enjoy because you're not going to get this again for quite a few years. So I would definitely recommend a gap year. I was very anti-gap year to start, but now I am totally 180 and I am very pro gap year. So if you're considering it, I recommend it. It was a really good opportunity for me to kind of refocus myself and get a little bit more grounded for sure. So what did I do during my gap year? In the summer of 2023, so this was right after I graduated, and then winter 2024, I just finished up my prereqs at a community college. I did accelerated anatomy, physio, and micro. I don't know if I'd recommend that. I would definitely recommend taking your time with these courses. Um, but just timeline wise, this was the thing that worked for me. And it was definitely very, very difficult. But if you're also in that same position, it's doable. It's just a hard 6 or 8 weeks, So I finished up those courses. And then for patient care experience, I spent my time as a dermatology medical assistant. I worked at two different offices and this was a really fun experience for me in terms of getting comfortable with like the clinic schedule and working kind of hands-on more with patients. This is also, I would say, one of the few patient care experiences where it doesn't require you to have a certification to be a dermatology MA. Other MA positions do require you to have a certification, and it's definitely a plus, to have a certificate, but it's not mandatory for specifically dermatology. I'm not sure. I think I want to say like OB-GYN MAs, they have to be certified. Family practice, I think you also might have to be certified. So just like generally, derm is a good field to enter if you're not wanting to do certification or you don't have time to. Um, but I really enjoyed this. I ended up really liking the field, and it's something that I'm considering as a specialty for when I graduate. Shadowing is another big category for PA programs. This is your opportunity to kind of show that you've explored at least like surface level other healthcare careers. And it's an opportunity also for you to explain why you prefer PA versus other healthcare paths. So I shadowed an OBGYN physician, family medicine physician, and dermatology PAs outside of working with them. During this time, I also got my BLS certification. I think this is just honestly a need to get if you're going to be a healthcare provider, if you're like kind of going down that path in terms of pre-health. I would say you need to get this for sure. And it's so easy. It's very easy. It took like half a day. You're certified and it's good for like 2 years. I think mine's expiring next year, so I do need to renew it. And yeah, like I said, just traveling, spending time with friends and family. This is the opportunity to do it in your gap year. So I'd recommend it. I definitely know people who have taken more than one gap year. They've taken two, three, four, five gap years. So don't feel like you're behind or that you're not in the position where you want to be if you do have to or want to take a gap year. It's a really fun time. It really was. So I recommend it. So I know a lot of people get just generally confused about what the timeline looks like for PA, especially after you graduate. So I took the liberty just to make a little timeline to orient ourselves here. This is just also kind of how my brain works. So I graduated in June of 2023, and then from June to July, I took those accelerated courses, like I said. That was honestly 0 to 10 would not recommend, but you do what you have to do. And then in December of 2023, that's when I started working as a derm MA. This was a really great experience. I saw a lot of different derm cases, especially working in two different offices. One was medical surgical cosmetics, and we had a Mohs surgeon on site, so it was really fun to see her work. And then another one was medical surgical. We saw and no Mohs in that one. If you guys are familiar with Mohs, it's a micrographic skin surgery to remove skin cancers that are invasive. And it's you just take like layer by layer of skin and analyze it under a microscope as you are performing the surgery. So it is quite time consuming, but it's a lot more accurate, is what I've heard, compared to your standard like excision. So it was really fun to see that. And I'm biased, but I really love derm, so I'd recommend that job for anyone looking for one. And then letters of rec are also a big component for PA applications. So around that same time, December 2023, February 2024, that's when I started asking people for these letters of rec. And just for reference, I was planning on submitting in June of 2024. So this is maybe like what, like 4 to 6 months in advance. I would recommend that length of time, honestly, just because your letter writers are busy and they have other things going on. And, it's definitely, they're going out of their way to write you a letter. So I'd recommend asking them as much as in advance as you can, and then just kind of consistently check up on them and see how they're doing. Not annoyingly, but like every 2 months or something, just kind of check in and let them know where you're at as an update in the application cycle. And then in January to February 2024, I took my last prereq while working, which is also not fun. And that was a really good feeling just to be done finally with those courses. And then in March of 2024, this is like the dreaded thing that everybody hates thinking about, the personal statement. Um, I gave myself 3 months because I was not confident in my ability to write a paper or like write something after a while of being out of school. So I was like, I need some time. And then it's just a good, I think, amount of time to allow you to draft it. You read it, you give it to other people to read it, and then you'll redraft it, edit it, and you'll have your final thing pretty well reviewed by the time you're submitting. So I would say 3 months, 2 to 3 months would be a good amount of time. You can do less, you can do more if you know whether you're like a strong writer or not. But 3 months was like the sweet spot for me. And then I asked my one of the PAs I worked with for a letter of recommendation to kind of close out that section. And May 2024, I think it was like the end of May. That's when I finalized my personal statement. And then mid-June of 2024, that's when I submitted the first half of my applications. And these are to schools that required less than 1,000 patient care hours. I did this intentionally because I did not have enough hours I didn't have 1,000 hours by the time I wanted to apply. So I just kind of strategically applied to half of the schools I wanted in one go, and then the last half um, a little bit later, which you'll see. And I'll talk more about this when we get to the stats part, but my hours, I wasn't very strong in that. I didn't have too much experience compared to a lot of my other classmates, especially in school. So I would definitely say that. that was a drawback for my application. And then June through August, I continued working as a derm MA. August, I submitted the last half of my applications. And sadly, August 20th, I went back for you guys to look and see when this happened. August 20th, I got my first rejection, which was sad. I was a little bummed out. But not too long after that, on September 6th, I got my first interview invite. And this is like the best feeling in the world if you guys are wondering, what that process looks like. Obviously, you've worked so hard to get to this point. You've submitted everything. You're like dying to know, dying to hear anything from these schools, and hearing and getting the email that you're invited for an interview is huge. So this was this is like the end of the timeline, because after that it was just like interview, invite, interview, rejected, accepted, rejected, that kind of thing. So that was an interesting process. And I know a lot of people are very curious about stats and numbers and things like that. I want to say this is not at all standard, in my opinion, for what a normal PA applicant's stats look like. But I think that this worked out in my favor only because my PCE, as you can see, was super, super low. That was probably the weakest part of my application, but I kind of figured that would happen. And so I tried really, really hard to make sure my GPA stayed high so I could, compensate for it basically. And I do think that you can, if you're in a similar position, if you are really strong in your academics, but you don't have enough hours, then one can kind of compensate for the other. On the flip side, if your GPA is on the lower side, the more hours you have and the more experience you have, the better. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't count yourself out you know, just for like the idea of, oh, my GPA is too low, or oh, my PC is too low. No, I definitely think like certain experience can counterbalance other ones. So this was my GPA, and then they do have you calculate your science GPA out separately. For the June apps, like I said, I had less than 1,000 hours. As you guys probably know, the standard is about 1,000 to 2,000 hours. So you can see how kind of weak I was in this section here. But I was a little bit stronger with the volunteering and leadership. I had quite a few hours in those domains. I spent 114 hours doing extracurriculars, 72 hours shadowing. I had 4 letters of rec, one from my micro professor, physics professor, the doctor that I worked for, and then one of the PAs I worked with. And then I included my BLS cert in there, just to kind of round everything out. Um, so this is kind of a wonky stat reflection, I would say. This is very much not what the standard PA applicant looks like. Um, but I would say competitive GPA would be 3.7, 3.7 and above. And then definitely do your best to shoot for 1,000 or more hours, because I was not quite able to get there by the time I applied for my first chunk. So I would definitely recommend that you kind of even those out a little bit. So this is what happened. These are the results. I applied to 8 schools in total, and I want to say like average that people apply to is like 8 to 11. So I was right kind of on the lower end of that, because there are fees, associated with applying to these schools. Out of these 8 schools, I did get 4 interviews, which I was shocked about considering how weird my stats looked. And I was accepted to 3 of them. I withdrew from one, just because of the other acceptances that I had. So I had 3 to choose from. And we're not surprised, I chose UCSD. We are the second cohort. This is a little family picture of us, on our white coat ceremony day. Um, I will say, like, this group, all my classmates are like geniuses or something. I don't even know like where they spawn from, but they're literally like they're so smart. And there's only 30 of us, so we're pretty small, so we know each other pretty well. And I feel lucky because I think, I feel comfortable with them, and I don't feel like there's people that are, particular one way or another. I think that we're all in it together and it's very much like a community feeling. So I think we got lucky with that. So we're little babies, we're guinea pigs, but I think it's okay. We're hanging in there so far, and we have the first cohort to kind of look after us a little bit. They are currently on their rotations, and not to like plug the program, but kind of to plug the program. Like, we did hear pretty positive things about the pack rat that they took, which is kind of like the exam that you take before entering your clinical rotations. um, the entire cohort, they performed above the national average on it. So if that says anything about the didactic part of this program, I think it's positive. So that was very encouraging and motivating for us to hear for sure. I think we all kind of took a sigh and like took a breath of relief after hearing that. So we're on a good track, I would say. And here are just some photos of like what it's like. These are like the happy moments. I will definitely say, family is a big part of it, just kind of having a good support system. I'm not too far from home. I'm from LA, so it's not like, ridiculous or anything. But it's nice to know that, you're close enough to, be able to go home every so often. We do get pretty busy, so it's good to stay focused and stay in SD, but when you want to go home, it's not too far away. So I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but on the top left, this is one of our classmates. She is like a amateur baker, but definitely not amateur. Like these cupcakes were gorgeous. I was like, oh my gosh, she made them for us like before our one of our exam weeks. And she's literally the cutest thing. These were delicious. And then just some photos from my white coat ceremony. On the bottom, this is like my learning community. So here at UCSD, they split you up into groups of six that they name after national parks. So we are Sequoia, and these are my little learning community buddies. We did also get the chance to go to Balboa Park as a part of one of our courses, our medical interview class. So that's a picture of some of my classmates and I on the top right. And then on the bottom right, we have our anatomy lab. That was a very traumatic experience. I think anatomy in general is a traumatic experience, but um, we had the instructor who was in the middle. He was amazing. He really carried us through that class. So I definitely credit him with me passing. So yeah, that was kind of a little short and sweet overview of my path to PA school. I'm going to stop sharing just so I can see if anyone has questions. But yeah, Sarin.
Hi, I had two questions. My first question was about the personal statement. Would you say, like specifically in your stats, because you said you had lower hours, like how did you kind of format, I guess, your personal statement to kind of be strong in that sense so that it can kind of, um, I guess, compare to your hours since it wasn't as much to like be stronger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think the personal statement is an opportunity for you to talk about things that are not like seen on the like the written application. So that was very much like I think my what I talked about there was almost completely unrelated to what I had in my application besides for um including information about like how my motivations for healthcare and for PA then led me to take on like my roles as a derm MA and then mentoring. So those are really the only times I mentioned work, but I never really went into addressing my, low hours, if that makes sense. I really wanted to highlight my why, and I think that's the like purpose of the personal statement for sure. They want to know why PA, why healthcare, first of all, and then why PA specifically. And then just kind of hearing your like explanations, your thought process, and making sure it's strong enough to convince them that, yes, you want to do PA. This is why I do, and this is why I don't want to do anything else. So I would say not really, you know, I didn't really touch too much on my low hours in the personal statement.
Okay, thanks. And then for like the why version, did you focus more on like a personal experience you had? Like I think you mentioned you were working with a PA, like something like that, or more of a kind of like a general aspect of what a PA is and like what appeals to you?
Yeah, so I started first, I introduced it with why healthcare in general, just to kind of get the ball rolling. And that was a personal kind of experience with family and things like that. And then going into YPA, I did touch on, for me, it was not just one experience that made me want to be a PA, it was multiple things. So I kind of wove that into the personal statement. I talked about how this one experience made me lean more towards PA. And then there was another experience that kind of made me lean even more towards PA. And then there was like a final experience where I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. So I know a lot of people take different approaches. Some people have like a one really positive experience with a PA, and that just like is it that constitutes their why, and that's totally fine. But I think I just chose that approach because it's what felt right to me and it's what was like honest about my experience. So that's kind of the way I formatted it. And then going into why kind of just like what I plan to do as a PA, that how do I explain this? Like how the PA profession like uniquely gives me opportunities to achieve what I want to do in healthcare, um, where like other healthcare careers won't give me that option, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like how I went about the personal statement.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. All right, and then Ellen.
Hi, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you like telling us your experience. I feel like it's really hard to find someone who's also like PA or like who is on the other side
Hmm.
of things. But I had like two questions if that's okay. Um for like the YPA, a lot I've asked a few people and like they're always like talking about how like oh like how you can switch like specialties, how like oh like someone literally told me she got into PA school by saying like oh, like she wants to like also have time for her family. And so she said that PA aligned better than like medical school, which to me sounds like very odd to tell them. But I was just wondering, like, what do you think about like those like typical answers of like leniency, like being able to have that like time? I don't know. It's
Hmm.
like kind of hard to navigate. Cause like for me, it was like I like the medical model more than I like the nursing model, so I picked PA. But I don't really know if that's like what they're looking for.
I think that's something that you can include for sure in the personal statement. Like that is, but like be ready to back it up, if you know what I mean. Like in interviews, they're going to ask you why. What's the difference between the nursing model and the medical model? Like, can you tell me why?
Yeah.
So just like be ready to explain. But I think, people do definitely fall into the trap of cliches, especially with
Hmm.
PA, like, oh, lateral. That's a huge, huge thing I always hear. And that's what I
Yeah.
hear all the time. I'm sure you hear it, you guys hear it too, like lateral mobility. And I'll have more time with patients. When, yes, I would say the lateral mobility part obviously is true. However, it's not as easy as you think to switch specialties. It
Yeah.
does take a lot of, work behind the scenes. So I don't think by itself it's a very strong thing to kind of support a YPA. And then having more time with patients, I honestly like I don't think it's necessarily true kind of having worked with PAs and having worked in that setting. I wouldn't say that they have any more time with patients than like the physicians did. To be
Yeah.
honest, it was very, very similar. So I also wouldn't use that as like your primary reason.
Yeah.
And then
That's
more
what I
time
know of.
with family. Yeah, 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 exactly. More time with family. I don't think it's a bad thing to say, but I would definitely focus on qualities of the PA profession that speak to you more, So like if have you ever like shadowed a PA at all?
Yes, I have.
Okay, perfect. So you've kind of like seen their day to day and kind of it is very similar to like a practicing
Hmm.
physician. But what's good, what's nice, and what I really liked about it was just the you kind of have that safety net of your supervising physician. You can
Hmm.
always go to them with any questions and collaborate with them. And it's very much like a conversation that you have about like about your patient's care. So I really like that element of PA, so I included that in my personal statement. So I would
Yeah,
say focusing more on like aspects of the profession over those cliches. I would definitely, that would make you stand out.
thank you. And then my other question was, um, so like I recently went to like one of the PA schools near here, and then I was talking and I was like, oh, they care more so about like community hours, and I was like, oh, I have like about like 3,000 of those, and she told me that was not enough, and I was wondering like, are these stats like real? Like 4,700 hours average, like over 2,000 paid clinical hours required. Like I feel like the more I'm hearing about people who got accepted into school, it's on like the 1,000 hours, 1,500 and they're throwing these big numbers at us, and it's like very discouraging.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
in your opinion, is it true? Like, is everyone coming in with 5,000 hours?
No, definitely not. My some of my classmates who, I mean, depending obviously, like how many gap years have you taken? How
Yeah,
much long have you been working? I mean, my classmate who was a former nurse, I mean, obviously he was working as a nurse for like
of course.
like, I don't know, 5, 6 years. So he probably has like 30,000 hours or something, right? But
Hmm.
as I also have classmates that came straight out of undergrad, so they don't necessarily have as many hours. There's me, I had literally less than 1,000 hours when I applied to this school specifically. So definitely not. And I would really not compare like your numerical stats to anyone else's because I really think everyone, everyone is like admitted to PA school on such like a unique basis. There's no like cookie cutter student at all. Like all of my classmates are so different. They have such different experiences. And I think that's what makes the class strong and it makes
Yeah,
us stronger as like future providers. So definitely no, don't be discouraged by people saying you need like 10,000 PCE hours because that's not true um, at all. And
yeah,
then community service hours, like no, just like simply no. You don't need like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 community service hours. What did I say in my slides? I had like what, like 400 or 300 or something like that. Like and that was enough, you know. I got 4 interviews and I got into 3 schools. So
yeah.
I think you know, people especially if you're like a Reddit surfer, like you're gonna see all these really insane stats and people are like, I had
Mhm.
10,000 PCE, you know, hours and I had like 2,000, you know, volunteering hours and I got into PA school, so you need to have it too. Like, no, simply no. They're not telling you like the whole story at all. Like, are they first time applicants, second time applicants? Like, how long were they out of school? What was their GPA? What were other parts of their application? There's so many factors. So I would say like competitive GPA, definitely 3.7 or above, but don't be discouraged if you have anything below that. Because like I said, if you have more like PCE, if you have more community service, volunteering, leadership, that those qualities are definitely going to help like compensate for a lower GPA. And it just gives you more to talk about too during the interview. So no, those are not true. No, not at all. So don't be discouraged by like big numbers like that because I would not say those are accurate. It's not an accurate reflection of the average PA student.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. Any other questions, guys? These are great questions. Yeah, Maya, feel free to like type it in the chat too. It's so funny. We have like a couple of professors from out of state who lecture for us, and they're great. They're wonderful, but you know, it's a little bit hard with 30 students like unmuting themselves. So we always use the chat, so it's completely like they're used to it and I'm like seeing what it's like for them. Okay. Let's see. How to get volunteering hours specifically with MA and shadowing with little to no experience. And then how can I make my PA application stand out? So to answer the first question, how to get volunteering hours, what do you mean by specifically with MA? Like medical assistant? Because that would be patient care experience. I'll just answer the second part of that question. Well, maybe you're gonna like write something out. Shadowing with little to no experience, that was me. I was looking for that too. I had little to no experience looking for shadowing. I definitely would say, um, talking with classmates in undergrad or talking with um, friends in undergrad, that's like a really great place to start. I definitely talked with my friends and seeing if they had any contacts that people who were willing to let me shadow them. I did try like cold messaging on LinkedIn for a while. I did get responses, but they they just were their office couldn't accommodate people shadowing. So that was a little bit sad, but I would definitely say start with like your classmates or your friends and trying to see if they have any contacts and then going from there. I think, someone is bound to say yes. And even if it's not PA, if it's like NP physician, like I still think that's worth it to have as part of your experience, just because you can use those experiences to talk about why you decided that that's not the path for you and why that made PA more appealing. So it's worth it. I wouldn't discount it just because it's not PA. And then it looks like you clarify here. Usually MA requires certificate prior experience. Yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, exactly. I was saying that a lot of MA jobs do require certifications, and that is a little bit tough to get in terms of like time. A lot of, I would say even most other PCE jobs like EMT, phlebotomy, like you do have to undergo more training for that. And if you have time and if you're willing to do it, totally, like it's worth it. I worked with certified MAs and they were great and they were very knowledgeable and very experienced. So I think it's worth it. It's not like a waste of time at all. But if your timeline is a little bit more limited, I would definitely say seeking jobs that don't require certifications would be preferred. So Derm MA's one. If you're not kind of leaning down the MA route, I would say we had a couple of PT aides. They really enjoyed their experience. You can do those things simultaneously while obtaining a certificate. But I would start just kind of like screening the jobs that don't require certificates first, if that's not something you want to do. I've also had classmates who they got their phlebotomy license. They got training to be an EMT. So those are really popular PCE jobs for sure. But since you're saying you're an undergrad and it's hard, I would definitely say look for the MA jobs that don't require certificates first. Or something else like a PTA also doesn't require a certificate. And I've heard it's fun. So I don't know personally, but I've heard it's fun. And then your second question. How can I make my PA application stand out? So this is a hard question to answer because it's very like person dependent, right? So all of my classmates have super different experiences and they're incredibly like unique. Like I said, we had a former nurse, we have an ex-army. She's like wild. That's crazy. She's like amazing. She knows so much. She's literally so smart. She's had, as you can imagine, so much emergency med experience. So that was very unique about her and very much like grounded in the roots of the PA profession. And we had, in general, a lot of people, you would think it's very like cut and dry in terms of, there's only so many PCE jobs, there's only so many volunteering opportunities. But I think everyone comes in with like a unique combination of them. And then if you combine that with your YPA, I just think in general, the package, like the ultimate package is just like unique in itself and it makes it stand out. Um, like I was saying to Ellen earlier, if you avoid those cliches, like I want to be a PA because lateral mobility, I want to be a PA because it's shorter than MD, I want to be a PA because I'll have more time with patients. If you avoid those, automatically you'll stand out because everybody uses those, right? And it's not necessarily true. So I think really focusing on parts of the profession that resonate with you. So for me, one thing that resonated with me was the fact that you are collaborating with other members of the healthcare team for one patient's care, right? If you have any questions, and that's something that I saw in practice too. The PAs that I worked with, if they were ever unsure as to what a diagnosis is, their supervising physician was literally like a phone call away, or maybe he was like in office that day. And they could just go to him, ask him the question, and he would provide his input. So that's something that I really liked about the profession. And I made sure to write, about that, how I worked with PAs who did that, how I was like involved in being like the intermediary in that. So I definitely think that is a good way to make your application stand out. And then just pursuing experiences that resonate with you, because automatically, when you talk about that in your interview and your personal statement, it's going to, they're going to see it. They're going to see like the passion that you have for it and the interest you have in it. And they're going to say, okay, yes, this applicant, they're very dedicated, they're committed to it, they love what they're doing. Like that's unique because so many people are like miserable. You don't want to come across that way. So those are just some ways that you can make your application stand out. I hope that helped a little bit. These are great questions, guys. Any other questions? Yay, I'm glad, Maya. No problem. You can unmute or like throw it in the chat. Yeah, Ellen.
Sorry, also if you hear like coffee in the background, I'm at Starbucks.
Yeah.
But um, another question I have is uh, for like the like personal statement. I was recently at a workshop and they told me they were like mention like try not to overlap the experiences from your like how like there's like the experiences you have to write and then like your personal essay. They're like try not to overlap that all too much and then talk about like the effect you have on the community. How do you kind of like add like your own personal experiences to why healthcare, why PA, and then like what you've done for like I guess pursuing it, and like then like isn't it like 1,100 word maximum, right? Or something along those
Something like
lines.
that. Yeah, there's definitely a cap on it. Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with that cap while trying to cover like so many different things?
Yeah, that was definitely something, it was a problem I ran into because I don't know about you guys, but I'm like an overwriter. I will surpass that word limit by like hundreds and hundreds of words. And it's very hard, especially when they're asking you such a broad question to narrow everything down. But I would say I started with an outline, of how I wanted it to flow. I agree with the idea that you don't want to repeat your written application in your personal statement. You don't want to just list all of the like the volunteer PCE leadership experiences that you had. You don't want to just like list that again. They already know. They can see it on the application. What they want to know is just kind of like the background behind it and how each of these experiences they support like why you want to be a PA and that kind of route instead of just listing things. So I th from what I remember in my personal statement, it was very brief what I mentioned about my past roles and my past experience in terms of like leadership, volunteer, job. But if there's experiences during any of those roles that you had that contribute to your YPA, then yeah, by all means include it. That's kind of what I did. There was like a patient interaction I had at my job as a derm MA that contributed to my Y, so I highlighted that. But I think something to note about that, it's anecdotal, right? Like it's not just, you're not like listing it and you're not just stating it, you're telling the story briefly because of the word limit. Um, and then you're relating it to why that's supporting your journey as a pre-PA student, or like why that relates to your motivation to be a PA. So yeah, I mean, I really think that it's more like narrative style versus listing out your past experiences. And then really focusing more on like things that are outside of the application, just to make sure that word count is like valuable, like you're saying valuable things in that limited amount of word count. And you're not just repeating everything that was on the application. So I would say like 90% of it was like everything was like 90% of it was details outside of my application, and like 10% of it, the relevant parts of my application, I included in the personal statement. So I would just filter it that way. Like you don't have to tell your entire, like you don't have to do like a presentation like I did about like I did this and then I did this, because they can see the progression. They just want to really know like the motivation, behind why you pursued these things, and like the impact, like you were saying, like the impact that made on your community and how that is motivating to you and your goals as a future healthcare provider. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay. If it doesn't make sense, please tell me. I will not get offended. Um, Yay. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Saudine.
Sorry, one more quick question. For the extracurricular like activities section, how did you do your descriptions? Because I've heard some people give kind of just like straightforward explanation of what their roles were, and then I've heard other people say they've done like not like stories from their experiences, but like some kind of maybe like anecdote of something they've experienced as a way to describe what they did in that role. So I was just wondering how you mentioned that.
Yeah. Um, from what I was like advised about, you said like extracurriculars, right?
Yeah, like the
Okay.
experiences section. Sorry,
Forgive
that's
me.
what it's called.
No, 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 you're fine. I'm like, my brain is like turned off. Yeah, so I was advised either doing like bullet points about your roles and like your impact, and then or doing like paragraph style. I went with paragraph style, but that's just basically like your bullet points in full sentences. So if you guys have like a resume or like a LinkedIn, I just honestly just kind of transitioned that into like paragraph style. And then I added some things here and there that maybe I didn't include on my resume. So I personally just went with a paragraph style, but I did just, state my role and what I was responsible for. Like for, do I even have it actually? Let me see. Let me see if I can give you an example. Because I would also just generally recommend that you guys keep everything related to your application in a different like drive. Like I just have everything on my Google Drive. Let me see if I can give an example because it's kind of hard to like just say what you should do when you don't have an example. Um, okay, so like for one of my patient care experiences,